I'm joined by Michael O'Brien of the Fisheries Campaign Lead for the International Transport Workers Federation regarding this recent migrant documentation scheme which has been introduced by the Minister for Justice, Helen McEntee. But it's claimed that major anomalies must be addressed before its launch to avoid unjust exclusions. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Clem. How are you?
Yeah, you might tell me about that particular title, Fisheries Campaign Lead.
Okay, well, just the International Transport Workers Federation, which is the organisation I work for, is the global umbrella body for trade unions that organise in the maritime and logistics and transport sector. So in Ireland, SIP2, Unite and Forsa are affiliates, but my specific role within the ITF is the fishery sector. I have colleagues who work in the merchant marine, the bigger ships, whereas my focus is particularly the welfare and the rights of non-European migrants who work on Irish-flagged fishing vessels, both documented and undocumented.
How widely, we know, for example, I know that people are documented, and there are stories or assertions at times that these workers, if they're working on Irish vessels, are often working in, at rates far below what the native Irish fishermen or women, I suppose, as well, might be working. Is that still prevalent?
Well, it is. They're more than assertions. I mean, only a month ago we had a ruling from the Workplace Relations Commission. It was covered in the Irish Independent newspaper there a week and a half ago, of a €20,000 award for an Egyptian fisher for non-payment of wages and compensation for overwork. So, and there's other Labour Court and Workplace Relations Commission hearings to come, and I anticipate there will be similar rulings made. So I would say it's fairly established fact. And as well, Maynooth University Law Department did a report there that was published in mid-October based on interviews with fishers from Egypt, Ghana and the Philippines who work on Irish flag vessels. So overwork, like long working hours, up to 20 hours a day is not uncommon, and consequential underpay as well for both the documented and undocumented fishers. So yeah, it's still a very persistent problem.
That's specific to your industry, but the legislation that's been introduced, we're told an estimated 17,000 undocumented workers will have their status regularised in this country, and we know they're right across the sector, and of course we know that many of these undocumented workers are open to exploitation and are very vulnerable, are they not?
Absolutely, and I think the figure of 17,000 is the best estimate out there about how many undocumented workers there are. Now, the question really is how many of those 17,000 will have a clear path to being regularised through this scheme. And my sincere hope is that the vast majority will. I suppose my main concern is that among the fishers that I'm acquainted with who are currently undocumented, most of them actually won't meet the criteria of the scheme, and these are fishers who've been in Ireland for longer than 4 years, and the scheme requires you to have been in Ireland for more than 4 years.
Why will they not meet the requirements?
Because the way the scheme is set out is that they say you have to have been undocumented in Ireland for 4 years or more, and therefore there's an implication that if you've been in Ireland for 4 years or more and have been documented within the last 4 years, even though if you're currently undocumented, you cannot qualify. So I realise that that's a bit complex, but just to put it in
would you put that in plain English, because that's gone over my head. But it's actually 3 years if you have children, I understand.
3 years if you've children in the state. But say, I spoke to an Egyptian guy on Saturday who's been in Ireland for 8 years. He originally arrived undocumented, and then when the permit scheme that's specific to the fishing sector was introduced in 2016, he was enrolled by his vessel owner. So he was documented, and then the vessel owner cut him loose in August this year, so he became undocumented again. Now he cannot avail of the scheme because he was documented within the last 4 years, because the scheme, they say you have to be undocumented for 4 years. So he's saying to me, Michael, how is that fair? I've tried to play by the rules. The vessel owner decided not to renew the contract. I managed to get work on an undocumented basis with another vessel owner, and he has crewmates or ex-crewmates who have been undocumented for more than 4 years, so they can go and get regularised. whereas he's shut out despite being in Ireland quite a long time. So there's all these little anomalies that are, well, they're not little, but they're very big for the guys who are concerned.
Explain something to me there, Michael, if you would. When somebody has been working like that gentleman you talked about from Egypt and was documented, and then when he's no longer required to work in that job, are you saying that he automatically then becomes undocumented?
Yeah, you see, there was a scheme introduced in 2016 specific to fishing. It's called the Atypical Work Permit Scheme for non-European fishers. And the way it works is that a fisher can be brought in with the approval of the Department of Justice by a vessel owner, be brought into Ireland. And they get annually renewed, like 1-year contracts. And the visa that they get from the Department of Justice, it's called the Visa Stamp 1. And basically they're tied to the particular vessel owner, and then it's at the whim of the vessel owner to renew that contract on an annual basis or not. Now, if either the contract comes to a natural conclusion at the end of a year and the vessel owner decides not to renew, or if something happens mid-contract that severs the relationship, often it's injury. Injury is the biggest reason why the employment relationship ends. The fisher has a 28-day window to try and locate an alternative vessel owner to employ him under the terms of the scheme, or else effectively to become undocumented. So what often happens, Clem, is that because of the overwork regime, that there's a prevalence of back injuries, hand injuries, even catastrophic injuries like loss of fingers, and the fishers then have to recuperate, and typically the vessel owner will just cut them loose, and the vessel owner will have moved on and employed somebody else to fulfill that role. And by the time the fisher recuperates, they're undocumented, and they have to go around odd jobbing on other vessels on an undocumented basis.
Where, of course, they're open to being paid at much, much lower rates, and et cetera, and being exploited. Well,
it's kind of a standard. You see, the issue is that the rate that's kind of become prevalent and standard is minimum wage on a notional 39-hour week. There's like a standard kind of approved contract, and the contract basically says that it's based on an average notional 39-hour week, but the fisher ought to be paid for every hour he works. But the reality is that they all tell me is that they work, anything from 15 to 20 hours on a day. Like that particular example I gave where the Labour Court made a ruling a few weeks back, the fisher in question worked 17-hour average days.
My God.
And the legal maximum is 14. And right. That's in a given day. So hence the prevalence of injuries and all that. So basically what we're left with is that we have a kind of a cohort of fishers who are currently undocumented, but they were in the scheme at some point within the last 4 years. And the fact that they were documented within the last 4 years excludes them from applying for this regularisation scheme. The other issue that we have is there are fishers who have temporary status because they've been accepted by the Gardaí into the National Referral Mechanism for suspected victims of human trafficking. So since 2016, 32 fishers have been admitted into by the special unit within the Guards, the anti-trafficking unit, into their referral mechanism for suspected victims of human trafficking. So this is the same scheme that's set up for sex workers, for others who are brought in and so on. And when they're admitted into that scheme, they get a special temporary stamp that's renewable every 6 months. And then, at the conclusion of the investigation, or if there's a prosecution or whatever, they may be called as a witness. But at some point, it comes to a conclusion, and in theory, their permission ends and they go home. Now,
and you want that protection extended to cover the workers in your sector as well.
Well, I'll give you an anonymous case. There's an Egyptian fisher was admitted into the referral mechanism for human trafficking this year, and he was in Ireland since 2007. So he was in Ireland for 14 years, was never documented, and under different circumstances, had he just hung on and endured the abuses, I would say, at the hands of the vessel owner, right up until now, or January when the scheme opens, that he would have been able to plot a course out and maybe get this scheme, when it comes with a visa stamp 4, and that visa stamp 4 enables you to work for any employer in any sector. So it's seen as highly advantageous, and it's a 2-year stamp as well. So he could have, plotted a way out that way. Whereas because he's been admitted into this scheme, he has his rolling 6 month renewable stamps, and then if the investigation ever happens, then that's that. Just the last thing I'd say, Clem, is that the other kind of last anomaly that I mentioned is that those legally documented fishers that I mentioned, that they're the ones that are on this stamp one, tied to their vessel owner. And they're looking at this scheme and saying, actually, this scheme is more advantageous. It's offering something more advantageous than what they're currently enduring. Because, as I say, they're tied to the one vessel owner on an annual renewable contract, whereas, say, they have an undocumented crewmate on the same vessel who's never been documented. That crew member can go and apply for this and get a more advantageous stamp than the documented guy, and go maybe leave fishing, go into construction, as some of them do, if they can't move on legally.
All right, Michael,
yeah.
I'll have to leave it there, Michael, because we're just running out and have another guest to get through, but it's certainly very, very strange, and it's an incredibly hard-working industry. I mean, the conditions at sea, and we wish indeed everybody a safe fishing.
It is, and I just say, Clem, the Minister has a month maybe to iron some of this out. This is fixable in the coming weeks. It can just be made a bit more inclusive and simplified, and we can, so it won't end up in the courts, really. That's the point.
All right, Michael, on that of the International Federation, Transport Workers Federation, on that issue of migrant documentation scheme is welcome, but major anomalies must be addressed as the union before the launch to avoid the unjust exclusions which have been described by Michael O'Brien there.